Welcome to Castle of Spirits, Extrasode number 6, brought to you by episode 20 of the Castle of Spirits Paranormal podcast, Haunted Objects. And Vince, why don't you tell the fine folks what we're doing today?
Well, today, as with every Extrasode you'll discover, we're going to be reading some reader and listener submitted paranormal stories. We've chosen them because they had to do with haunted objects.
I'm excited.
Yeah, there's a lot. We have an embarrassment of, first of all, castleofspirits.com. In case you didn't know, there are 4,600 true paranormal stories collected over the last 25 years. 26.
Going on 26 now, yep.
And when you search through that database, you'll find untold amounts of creepy stuff, would be the G-rated version of saying it,
okay.
I believe. And today we're going to share some with you, so check it out.
Shall I go first?
Yes, please.
All right. The first story I'm going to read is called Voices in the Wardrobe, and it was submitted by Anonymous in England in April of 2000. My family on my dad's side has always had a history of seeing ghosts, I suppose. Both me and my dad have had paranormal experiences, and my grandpa supposedly also had them. I personally haven't seen anything for around 4 years, but I still get weird feelings about places. The story I'm going to tell is one my dad told me from his childhood. He doesn't like to talk about it much, and so I'm sorry for some of the sketchy details. My dad's family used to live in a very old and large house in England, which has sadly now been torn down. But just as an aside, Vince, I would really be interested in finding out what a very old house in England means. Because, like, here, if we say we live in an old house, it's from, like, the 1910s to the 1940s. Yeah. I imagine in England it's a little bit older.
Yeah, I can imagine.
When my dad was a kid, they used to drive up and see his relatives all the time. The house had also been my grandpa's childhood home. When they visited, my dad would always be put in the smaller guest room, which had been my grandpa's room when he was a kid. When my dad was sleeping in there, my grandpa used to refuse to even enter the room for any reason and generally used to avoid that part of the house. Later, my dad found out that he had had similar experiences to those my dad had, but being a very straight and Victorian kind of father, he felt it would be kind of stupid and weak for him to make a fuss about his kids sleeping in there. It's just the kind of man he was. However, my dad always had an irrational fear of the room, similar to the feeling I have had about some of the places we have lived. In particular, he was terrified of the heavy oak wardrobe that stood at the bottom of his bed. The reason for his fear is that he used to hear voices coming out of the wardrobe when he was tucked up in bed at night.
No way.
Ew. I got such bad goosebumps when I was reading this story, getting ready for this episode. He said that it used to start with just a few voices at first, and as it grew later, there would be more and more until it sounded like there were about 20 people in the cupboard. He told me that what scared him the most was that the voices all knew his name and that they were all begging him to let them out of the wardrobe, just for a minute. He had the impression that they were watching him, and when he moved towards the wardrobe, they'd get more clamorous. However, nobody else in the house was ever disturbed. The wardrobe was in between the bed and the door, so he couldn't get out of the room. He used to sometimes hear knocking and thudding noises on the inside of the wardrobe and was too terrified to call his parents as he knew they'd be angry. Eventually, he'd fall asleep from exhaustion, but luckily the voices or any paranormal occurrence only seemed to happen during the night, so he wasn't too scared of the room during the day, apart from the creepy feeling it gave him. However, one day he was sent up to the room to get a coat or something, and as he walked past the wardrobe to get to the chair, the door swung open by itself, and something came rushing out at him. My dad was never able to say what it was, but apparently it moved around the room very quickly and screamed his name in a human voice. My dad was scared to death, as you would be, and ran out of the room. But I don't know if it ever happened again. So again, thank you to Anonymous in England for submitting that story in April of 2000. That was a good old-fashioned creeper.
Something came rushing out of the wardrobe.
Screaming his name.
And the creepiest part was that he couldn't really say what it was.
And that it was during the day.
Yeah.
We've said it before, daytime haunts somehow scarier than nighttime haunts. It's just like the opening sequence in Prince of Darkness.
Yeah.
The daytime, walking along the campus in the bright sunny day, saying hi to friends, like with the ominous music over top of it.
That ominous John Carpenter music.
It's terrifying. It's so scary. I'll make sure that Prince of Darkness is in the attic. If you've never seen it, it's a really excellent
And the absolute
watch.
creepiest thing about that movie, Jameson Parker's mustache. He looks like something straight out of a 1970s Playgirl magazine with clothes.
Well, let's not mustache shame. Do you have a story to read that doesn't involve mustache shaming?
I have a story to read that doesn't involve mustaches at all.
Well, let's hear it.
It actually involves a haunted mirror.
Ooh.
This story is called Not My Reflection / House on 51st Street, submitted by Liz D. in Michigan, USA, September of 2000. So we got a couple of stories that wasn't the one you just read from
2000 also. Yep.
Old school, baby. Old school. And the story goes like this. How could anyone be afraid of a mirror? A mirror only shows the reflection of the person looking into it and whatever is in its surroundings, right? Unfortunately, that's not always true. I remember this one mirror that we had. It was large, oval, wooden framed, and it hung in my brother's and my bedroom. It looked like a regular mirror, and it served its purpose, yet there was something that disturbed me. We moved a lot, and every time we moved, that mirror was always put in my room. I woke up screaming sometimes, saying to my mother that the mirror had ghosts in it. Now, this happened often, and when we finally moved to Michigan, it worsened. By then, I wouldn't even go to sleep because of that awful mirror.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe it bothered my brother, but I was set on believing that it was evil. Unfortunately, I do remember what I saw in that mirror, and it still scares me to this day. Every night after my parents went to bed and my brother was fast asleep, something would wake me up. I was never really sure what it was, but when I looked across the room at the mirror, I saw a nightmarish creature in it. It was a young boy. That I was certain of. But it had bright red eyes, and its skin was an awful greenish color.
Mm-mm. That's not what color young children should be.
No, I'm getting a whole Danny Glick vibe from Salem's Lot.
Oh, if it scratches on the mirror, I'm going to be really upset.
He would just point and laugh at me. I could do nothing but watch it because I was so terrified that I couldn't move or speak. I began to lose a lot of sleep because of this mirror. No kidding.
Yeah, for reals.
No one else saw this thing. At least no one told me if they did. Every night, the same thing would happen. I'd be awakened, then the evil boy creature thing would appear, followed eventually by my screams. Soon, though, this little routine took a turn for the worse.
No.
It's getting worse. Oh, God, here it goes. The thing began to talk to me. Not just talking, but threatening me. I can't really remember exactly what the threats were, seeing how this all happened several years ago, but let's just say it was quite terrifying. After several nights of my screams, my parents finally took the mirror out of the room.
I mean, why did it have to come to that? Or why did it have to take so long? The kid screams once. Maybe just move the mirror out.
Easy solution. Right? No need to call Ghostbusters.
Save the kid some trauma.
No exorcist involved. Just move the mirror.
Yeah.
Right? You think that would work, right? But you haven't read the rest of the story.
Uh-oh.
They hid it behind a couch that was against the wall near the back door. Now, this wasn't a smart move because even though it was behind the couch, a small piece of the mirror could still be seen. Every day I would sit on that couch to put my shoes on for school and see that small part of the mirror sticking out. You can guess what I saw in it, right? That evil thing was still there, taunting and scaring me. By then, my father had enough of the mirror and all of my complaining and whatnot. So one day he took it out back, broke it.
I mean, was that necessary?
Then burned the frame. This guy's serious.
For reals.
It's like, let's go nuclear on this mirror.
I would have been like, let's just take it to an antique store.
Yeah, pass it on to somebody else, just like in It Follows.
Yeah.
But only this is a mirror, not an STD.
Some people are into it. Just put a note on it. This mirror is haunted.
Yeah, sell it on eBay. Well, yeah, there was eBay. eBay was around in 2000.
For reals, yeah.
And the story continues. To me, that's a bit much for someone to do unless they themselves were afraid of it too.
Well, then turns out Dad was afraid of it too.
I believe that I wasn't the only one who saw things in it, yet I still don't know why we didn't get rid of it earlier. You may think that a mirror is a harmless thing, but things aren't always what they seem. Some people believe that mirrors are gateways or portals to another dimension or the spirit world.
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
Maybe that was the case with my mirror, and that creature that certainly was not my reflection. Thank you again for submitting that story, Liz D. in Michigan from September all the way back in 2000. What'd you think of that story, Jane?
That was terrifying.
I think so too.
And you want to bring that old mirror into the house.
Hey, Liz is still alive and well.
Yeah, because they got the mirror out of their house, but you want to bring that old mirror of ours back into the house.
Yes, but the reality is that I think it would be really cool to have a ghost child staring out at me from a mirror.
Okay, well,
as long as it stays in the mirror.
If we're going to bring the mirror into the house, then we're going to break one of the rules of mirrors that we discussed in the Bloody Mary episode, where you're not supposed to have, I think
no
we
chanting into
talked about it. Anyway, I read about it when I was researching that. We're going to have the mirror facing the other mirror in our living room. You're not supposed to have mirrors that face each other because it creates a vortex between them where spirits can enter and might not know how to get back out.
Okay, so you're going from wanting to not bring the mirror into the house in the first place to wanting to create a vortex and a ghostly supernatural freeway in our house.
I'm just saying that if you're gonna test the paranormal waters, then you better be prepared to just dive in fully.
Why mess around? We can just go the full 12 yards.
Right.
I don't think that's a saying, but
I don't either, but it is now. Shall I read another story?
Please do.
I have a story here called Haunted Clock 1, meaning there are other stories called Haunted Clock on the Castle of Spirits website, but this is number 1. And it was submitted by Lynn in British Columbia, Canada in September of 1999.
Oh man, this
Talk
is blowing
about
my
OG.
mind. This is some old school stuff. Old school horror.
What?
Continue.
Okay. I am the 4th owner of a grandfather clock that was first purchased by my grandmother's brother approximately 100 years ago. Great Uncle Telmac, I'm assuming I pronounced that incorrectly, was a man of wealth who could neither read nor write, but went on to start one of the largest insurance companies to date. When he passed away, the great clock stopped, and no amount of coaxing would get it to start again.
Wait, how do you coax a clock? Come on, baby.
You
can do
offer it treats. It sat in the dining room of his house in Montreal, Quebec, and when the family was gathered around the dining room table to hear the reading of the will, the clock started again with no outside influence.
What?
Mm-hmm. The clock is a 7-foot-tall unit that has a series of 3 weights that have to be pulled up by chains to wind it. When my grandmother Blanche died, it again stopped working and would not start. My mother was given the clock by her sister and had the clock shipped 1,000 miles to her house. For weeks, the clock would not run. When she received a copy of her mother's will in the mail, the clock again started.
Whoa.
I was living with my mother at this time, and we had gone to town. We found the copy of the will in the mailbox, and when we went into the house, we found the clock running. When my mother passed on, the clock struck 13 and would stop and run in spurts. The clock thus far has been behaving itself with no other episodes. And that is the end of the story. Thank you, Lynn, in Canada, September 1999. I would love an update on that, Lynn, if you happen to be out there, 24 years on. Have there been any more clock antics? So I chose that story because there's actually a similar occurrence in my family.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. My mom has actually several clocks that you have to either wind with a key or you have to pull the little weights to, start it going. At least one of them is a stand-up grandfather clock, but one of them is a clock that hangs on the wall, but it has the weights. I don't think it's a cuckoo clock, but it's kind of a mix between the two. But anyway, it was my grandparents' clock, and my grandmother had passed away, and my grandfather had recently moved into a home and was not doing real well. And so their home had been sold, and the heirlooms kind of distributed among the kids. And so my mom had this clock that was my grandparents' clock. And my grandfather passed away in the middle of the night, and my mom was at home. And when she got up in the morning, she saw that the clock that had been my grandparents' clock had stopped. But it didn't stop because, when the weights run their course and it has to be, you have to pull them down again, the clock stops. But it had not run its course. It stopped with the weights like in the middle. It just randomly stopped.
Really?
Yeah. And it had stopped at the time when, presumably, at the time that he passed.
That's interesting. I wonder why those things happen. I mean, does it mean that the person was really attached to the clock and, they were in sync with it, or?
I don't think so. I mean, I vaguely remember the clock from, my childhood, but I don't remember that it ever had like a real special meaning to anyone. It wasn't like a family heirloom clock. It was a clock that they had. But I think to me, it felt like more of a way, it felt more like communication.
Yeah.
A way for my grandfather to communicate with my mother, saying goodbye, I guess. That's just how it felt to me.
Wow.
And none of the other clocks had stopped, by the way. Like I said, they have several clocks that you have to wind or pull the weights, and that was the only one that had stopped.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I presume that means sometimes it's possible when a soul departs the body or whatever happens when you die, that there's a brief window where somebody can communicate.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It seems like there's this liminal space between being alive and being gone, dead and gone. There's this space in between where you have an opportunity, a brief opportunity to give some kind of a sign if you choose to make some kind of a statement.
But I have a better idea.
Okay,
why not just save all that energy and make an appearance at your own funeral? Just walk straight up there and say, "Hey, everybody, good to see you. Peace out."
Yeah. You could go all like holographic, like Roy Orbison in the in the Traveling Wilburys video.
Oh, yeah.
Vince, do you have another story to read to us?
I do. I have one more story that I found in the Castle of Spirits archive, and it's also about a haunted mirror.
Ooh, I and the listeners would hear of this, also a haunted mirror.
This story is called Reflection, number 2. Again, we have several stories on the website named Reflection. It comes to us from Anonymous in New Zealand in December of 2000. And the story goes like this. Although I've had many experiences of my own, the one I'm about to tell you is not my own. A very close friend of mine was born in Korea and lived there until about the age of 12. The story took place at a school camp she was at just before she left the country. She was sharing a tent with another girl, her best friend at the time. She was awakened in the small hours by her friend claiming that she needed to use the toilet, which was 100 meters away from the tents. Like all young girls, she didn't like the idea of walking over alone, so she asked my friend to accompany her. As it was dark and cold, my friend decided not to do the honorable thing and told her to go alone.
Aw, best friends.
When her friend returned, she commented that although it was dark in the toilet, she had still been able to see her reflection in the mirror, which had startled her a little bit. She went on to say how strange she looked, appearing very pale and not like herself at all. They didn't think any more of it, and they drifted back to sleep. The next morning, upon waking, they both ventured off to the toilets together. What do you think they found? There was no mirror in the toilets.
Nuh-uh.
So, what did she see? That was Reflection number 2 from New Zealand in December of 2000. Kind of a scary story, wouldn't you say? Not exactly a haunted mirror, but...
But kind of? Maybe it was a ghost mirror.
See, the first thing I thought of was that there was nobody else there. It was just a haunted ghost mirror that showed up.
Yeah, and it distorts everybody like a Snapchat filter to make them look like a
fun
ghost.
house mirror.
Seriously, though, that gives me shivers. I keep shivering. And friends, if you have stories of haunted objects, maybe a horrifying mirror or a creepy ass chair, something, any kind of haunted objects. We would love to hear about them. So you can submit that through castleofspirits.com/submit. And if you have any other ideas for topics for us, you can submit that to us at castleofspirits.com/lounge.
So speaking of the lounge, Jane, do we have anything in there to read today?
We actually do.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So our friend Christy, who actually submitted something in the lounge that prompted the haunted objects story, she wrote back and she said, "I'm sitting here crocheting some voodoo dolls." That's a girl after my own heart. And listening to episode 20. Thanks for the shout out, by the way. So listening to the chair's stories brought to mind a story that was passed around at my high school. I don't know if it's a haunting per se, but there was a chair in the biology class that was called, and that's hilarious that it was in the biology class. The chair was called the baby maker.
Whoa.
The story goes that any female staff member or unfortunate teen who happened to sit in this chair would find out they were pregnant within a month or so.
Yikes.
The baby maker chair in the biology class.
Different kind of haunting, I'd say.
For reals. And Guillermo, we actually have a message from Guillermo who says, "Hey guys, I have a topic to suggest to you to talk about in the podcast. I've been following it since October, and I found you by searching info about a game often called Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board." Heck yes. About which I believe there are some stories on the website. Don't know if you know about it, but I think it is an interesting game with a lot of background history and a lot of different versions. But the only version that I've been personally told by close people that have played it that actually works is the one that people play lifting a person in a chair, which Wikipedia describes like this. And I'm actually not going to read that section because I think that's a great idea, Vince. I think we should do an episode on Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board, because would you believe it if I told you that your humble ghost keeper, Jane, I have a Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board story.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, right on.
I do. So we should do that. So Guillermo, thank you so much for that suggestion. We are going to get on that here very soon. And just, preemptively, if you have a Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board story that you would like to share and possibly have it featured in the Extrasode, get that to us. Send it in castleofspirits.com/submit. Check back in soon for episode number 21, Haunted Lakes.
Ooh, I'll bring my snorkel.
You should do that.